Kachunga, my friends, Kachunga. It is time again. It is that time again. A lovely Saturday afternoon. Yes, where we talk about the unusual. And yes, today we'll be talking about the Travis Walton abduction case. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. First things first. We have to do our usual shenanigans. So, when you've watched the video, when you've watched it and you've liked it, please hit that thumbs up button to show you the likes. Let's get these likes in. I want to get these likes in. And if you haven't done so already, and you want to see some more of my stuff, please subscribe down below. The red square that says subscribe. And when you want to know when the videos are coming out, where do you want to know when these videos are coming out? Hit the time bell. Ring that bell. The bell. Ring the bell. Yes, ring that bell. And then you will know when the videos are coming out. It will tell you when they're coming out. But first, let's start with the bad jokes, the bad puns. Ooh, what have we got today? Well, my mate Walter in America, his wife Ethel, State Fair every year. And every time he would say to her, Ethel, I'd love to go for a ride in that helicopter. Ethel would always reply, I know, Walter, that helicopter ride is $50, and $50 is $50. Finally, they went to the fair, and Walter said to Ethel, I'm 87. I'm 87 now. If I don't ride that helicopter this year, I may never get another chance. Once again, Ethel replied, Walter, that helicopter is $50, and $50 is $50. This time, the helicopter pilot overheard the couple's conversation and said, listen, folks. Listen, folks. Yes, that was a phone moving by itself. I exchanged with the cat. Listen. Listen, folks. I'll make you a deal with him. I'll take both of you for a ride. If you can both stay quiet for the entire ride, I won't charge you a penny. If you say just one word, $50. Walter and Ethel agreed, and up they went in the helicopter. The pilot performed all kinds of fancy moves and tricks, but nothing more was said by either Walter or Ethel. The pilot did his defying tricks over and over again, but still there wasn't so much as one word said. When they finally landed, the pilot turned to Walter and said, Wow, I've got to hand it to you. I did everything I could to get you to scream or shout. But you didn't. I'm really impressed. Walter replied, Well, to be honest, I almost said something when Ethel fell out, but, $50 is $50. Bill, one of my mates, William, is putting his young daughter to bed one night, and as he walks out the bedroom door, he hears her saying her prayers. She says, Good morning, Mummy. Daddy. God bless Mummy. God bless Daddy, and God bless Grandma. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Rushes back into her bedroom. And I said, Why did you say the last part? His daughter replies, Because I needed to. The next day, Grandpa died of a heart attack. Bill was worried about his daughter, but thinks it must be a sad coincidence. That night, he tucked his daughter into bed again, and once again he hears her saying her prayers. God bless Mummy. God bless Daddy. Rest in peace, Grandma. He was now really worried and thinking to himself, had my daughter really seen the future? The next day, Grandma dies, and now Bill was convinced his daughter can predict the future. For the rest of the week, nothing happened. On Sunday night, as Bill leaves his daughter's bedroom, he waits outside and listens to any more prayers. Sure enough, he says, "God bless you, Mummy. Rest in peace, Daddy." Now, Bill was really panicking and thinking, "Oh, God, I'm going to die tomorrow." The following day, Bill was in a complete mess all day in work. A real nervous wreck. He constantly checks his clock and looks around the room. He's on edge all the time, expecting to die any moment. He is so nervous. He is so nervous. Sorry. He's so nervous that he doesn't leave the office until it's past midnight. Once it turns midnight, he says to himself with relief, "How is this possible? I should be dead." He goes in home and walks into the house to find his wife sitting on the sofa with a scared look on her face. He asks him, "Where have you been? What's taking you so long?" Bill replies, "Listen, honey, I haven't had the best of days." And he was just about to tell her what happened when she starts crying and bursts out, "I saw the mailman die yesterday." Um, um. And it's, it's, Mailman is the girl's father, not Bill. This was that tumbleweed comes across the screen. Yeah. See, 85-year-old man goes to see his doctor for his regular physical exam. The doctor says the man needs to provide a sperm sample and gives him a jar saying, "Take this jar home with you and come back tomorrow with a sperm sample." What else do you do with the sperm sample? Next day, the old man goes back to the doctor's and gives him the jar. It's clean and empty, as the doctor gave it to him. So the doctor asks what happened. He says, "Why is there no sperm samples in the jar?" The old man says, "Well, it's like this. First I tried with my right hand, then nothing. Then I tried with my left hand, and still nothing. I asked my wife for help. She tried with the right hand, nothing. With the left, still nothing. She tried with the mouth. First with the teeth in, then with the teeth out. Still nothing. We even called up Maisie, the lady next door, and she tried too. First with both hands and then an armpit. She even tried squeezing it between her knees, and still nothing." The doctor's really shocked by all this and asked incredulously, "Ask your neighbour?" "Yes," the old man replied. "Not one of us can get that bloody jar open." Boom, boom. Dun. See. Three bad jokes. Three bad jokes of my usual standard. And there's more to come next week. More bad ones. Ooh. So now we get to what we're actually here for. As I said, the Travis Walton abduction case. Now, me, to the who helped me get all information and stuff, is one of the most celebrated abduction cases recorded. Now, the bloke who does the writing for me, he's actually had the pleasure of meeting Travis himself, and certainly he's a very down to earth and humble man. As I read the story before I looked at this, there were 6 witnesses in the truck who all took lie detector tests, and others were missing for 5 days, only remembering the first 2 hours. I personally do believe this happened, but please listen to what I have to say and then come to your own conclusions. Are we ready? Are we ready? Then I will begin. The apparent alien abduction of the then 22-year-old Travis Walton in the winter of 1975, I was 5 years old then, is perhaps one of the most well-known of such encounters, not least Walton's story resulting in the book and the movie Fire in the Sky. It is also, perhaps ironically, this monetary compensation enjoyed by Walton that has led to some that has led to cast doubt on the incident, with several investigators claiming the account is nothing but a hoax. In September 2017, Walton would defend himself against such claims. Although, as we all will look shortly, Walton did fail one lie detector test. He has passed no less than 16 others. The main witnesses to the incident also passed their lie detector tests, and furthermore, it is hard to see what each of the men would have gained by supporting an apparent hoax. remains a case that fascinates most and divides others. It's potentially, however, barring any kind of proof or admission of fabricated or manufactured events. One of the most important incidents of this kind, and certainly one of the most documented and investigated. The case is not only intriguing in its own right, it opens up other avenues and areas of concern regarding the UFO and alien question. Not least the apparent rabid nature of skeptics, or perhaps even those who use skepticism as a shield to issue disinformation and cover whatever truth might be available. Before we look at the most intriguing encounter in more detail, check out the short video. We can't check out the short video because it's a click to the thing, so we'll skip it. But please check out the film Fire in the Sky. It is worth watching. It is worth watching. So now I'm going to try and talk you through the case itself, and this is where you come to see what you think. On the evening of 5th November 1975, I was 5 years old then, at a little after 6 p.m. followed another hard grinding day, sawing trees in the Apache 6 degrees region of the United Nations, the US National Forest. 7 hired woodcutters were making their way home to the town of Snowflake. Isn't that a cat? Arizona, in the head of the group, Michael Rogers' pickup truck. They chatted amongst themselves. The men, the aforementioned Rogers and Walters, along with Ben Peterson, John Goulet, Steve Pierce, Alan Dallas, and Dwayne Smith. Suddenly noticed a strange glow coming from the woodland side of the road. Thinking it was perhaps a forest fire, all of the men were suddenly more tempted than they might have been, because they become trapped in such a situation. According to MUFON's report on the incident, as they approached the hill in the road where the light was coming from, they suddenly saw a large silver disc hovering over a clearing in the roads. It glowed brightly, lighting up a patch of ground underneath it. Suddenly in shock at what he was seeing, Rogers would bring the truck to a stop. As soon as he did so, without warning, Walton would leap out of the passenger side door and walk directly towards a strange glowing craft. Now, would you do that? If you saw a craft, would you want to go out and see it, or would you rather look off and watch it from a distance? I do believe they're friendly and all that lot, but I don't know. I don't know if I would want to be that close to it. Yeah. Oh, here, excuse me. Not hearing or not listening to the rest of the woodcutting crew, who were pleading and demanding he return to the truck, Walton continued on. He was standing directly underneath the mystery object. Then strange mechanical turbine-like noises began to fill the air. At the same time, the craft began to wobble. Wobble, 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 wobble. Still in its hovering position, Walton, perhaps now sensing something was about to happen, stepped back slightly and slowly began to back away. Then came the beam of blue/green light. According to the reports of UFO researcher Jerome Clark, automatically said Jeremy, but Jerome Clark. The witnesses from the vantage point from inside the truck witnessed a blue-green light beam strike Walton square in the chest. This caused him to rise a foot in the air, his arms and legs outstretched, and shoot back about 10 feet. You think of the magic trick, you could do that in Las Vegas. During this, Walton remained within the glow of the craft's light. Suddenly he was seemingly flung to the ground like he touched a live wire, striking his shoulder upon landing. His body sprawled limply, apparently dead. This is certainly what the rest of the group initially thought as they sped away from the scene as quickly as they could. What exactly happened next, and what exact time frame varies slightly from account to account. However, it would appear after initially fleeing the scene, bloody hell, tripping over words, screen of the scene. Yes. The remaining 6 made the decision to return to the area in an attempt to retrieve their friend and colleague. However, upon doing so, he was no longer there. Despite being sure they had the correct location, he was simply nowhere to be seen. More than unnerved and simmering towards panic, the men would drive to a shopping centre in the nearby town of Heber. Again, while the exact time frame varies slightly between 7:30 to 8, Ken Peterson, on behalf of all six of them, phoned the local police. His call was answered by Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison. Although on the phone, Peterson stated merely that one of their crew had gone missing, Ellison still agreed to meet them at the location. When he arrived, however, the men, all visibly distressed, with some close to tears, would tell them exactly what they had seen. Their acting, they were awfully good at it. Perhaps naturally, Ellison was taken aback with the outlandish nature of such a serious claim. However, he would later state of the men's demeanour and behaviour, as I said, their acting, they're awfully good at it. It was at this point, himself slightly overwhelmed with the strange nature of the current incident, that Ellison would contact his superior, Sheriff Marlin Gillespie. His orders were to ask the men to remain at the shopping centre under his supervision until he could arrive. Around 9 p.m, Gillespie, along with police officer Ken Copland, pulled up with a police car in Heifer. Sounds like a top. How does that? Heifer. Heifer. By this time, several members of the crew, in particular Rogers, was becoming increasingly anxious. In particular, with the apparent lack of action, Rogers could command that the search was launched immediately and that they should return to the scene of the incident. Although they were not able to utilise any police search dogs, several officers, along with Rogers, Peterson and Dallas, did examine the location. However, there was no sign of Walton, and perhaps more importantly to their suspicions, there was no sign that anything as toward as the crew was claiming had taken place. The remaining crew members, in the meantime, would return to Snowflake and begin to inform family and friends of the bizarre situation. As the night wore on, the search would have to be delayed until the morning. However, there was concern amongst the police that Walton, who was only dressed in jeans, shirt and a light jacket, would fall victim to the brutal winter-like freezing conditions of the forest. Along with Roger, Copland would travel to Walton's mother, Mary Walton Kellett's house, to inform her of the situation and the witness's account of it. Her response and overall demeanour would strike Copland as odd. Rogers would tell her of her son's disappearance, to which she calmly listened before asking him to repeat the account. The account. Tripping over words. Well, I speak fast, you see. My natural speed is pretty fast. You can't say the words I say whatever. The first question she asked was whether or not anyone else other than the crew and the police were aware of the situation. Copland believed it wasn't a typical response as my mother informed that her son was missing. Ultimately, it would simply harden his suspicion of one untruth or another regarding Walton's apparent disappearance. However, deeper analysis of Walton's mother's general character would suggest this aloof type of response would be in line with her personality and attitude. She had, for example, raised 6 children, largely by herself and in difficult circumstances. She was ultimately very guarded regarding her feelings in public. As the days went on, though, the stress became all too apparent for her to see. On the night of her disappearance, she would contact Walton's brother Dane. Upon hearing the news, he would travel to Snowflake from his home in Glendale, Arizona. On the following day, the 6th of November, with the sun bathing the area in full light, the region was searched once more. This time, many more people were part of the operation, including multiple volunteers from the local community. However, once again, there was no sign whatsoever of Travis Walton. Police at least privately suspected that the UFO story had been put in place to cover up the accident or even a homicide. It was only a matter of days before news of the incident leaked to reporters from a whole range of centralist newspapers, as well as UFO investigators with various degrees of genuineness and competence. One of these UFO investigators hailed from Phoenix. It's always one surname that's very hard to pronounce, isn't it? Fred Sylvanus. Sylvanus. If I pronounced that wrong, I apologise. Whether his intentions were well intended or not, the interviews he obtained with Michael Rogers and Walton's brother Dwayne would go on to be often used by skeptics. It perhaps didn't help that both men would openly and maybe correctly criticised the effort by the police in finding their colleague and brother. More importantly, and in part, a genuine cause of concern over the years was Rogers' admission that he would no longer be able to fulfil his logging contract. He will come back to this later, as any kind of fraudulent behaviour for it could be key. The other statement come from Walton's brother Dwayne. He would reveal that both he and his brother had a long-lasting interest in UFOs. In fact, Dwayne would even reveal that he had witnessed a UFO himself 12 years previously. Furthermore, he would offer completely of his own accord that both he and Travis had made a pact that if either of them had got to witness a UFO, they would get as close as possible. Some reports even claim that they would try to get on board. Each of these statements would be used repeatedly against those involved with the case. Before we move on, let's take a little look at the logging contract. As unlikely as it might have been, why it is, whether coincidentally or not, perhaps the one real chink in the armour of their story. This is the logging contract. The timber thinning contract that Michael Rogers successfully bid for and won in the spring of 1974 is perhaps of interest. As per the terms of the deal struck with the US Forest Service, Rogers would be responsible for the thinning operation of 1,277 acres of land in the Apache Sitgreaves Forest. Rogers, in part, was successful with his bid due to considerable undercutting of the other companies bidding for the contract. However, by the summer of 1975, it was becoming increasingly obvious to Rogers that he was simply not going to meet the predetermined deadline to have the work completed. This would leave him to apply for a deadline extension, which was granted, but would have been a monetary fine against what he agreed to be paid. He would forfeit $1 per acre for all work carried out of the original deadline. The new extension was agreed, and Rogers was to have the thinning operation complete by the 10th of November. Once again, however, it was quickly becoming apparent to Rogers that he was going to miss the second extended deadline. If Rogers applied for another extension, which may have been granted, he would incur further fines. Furthermore, due to the already missed original target date, the Forest Service wouldn't pay in full for the work until it was complete. Now, this was quite a concern for Rogers. Not only would he not be able to pay his crew, he himself would be severely hampered financially. And with winter just round the corner, which would even further hamper work, some believe that Rogers, along with the rest of the crew, concocted the abduction claim in order to have their contract voided and receive payment in full due to circumstances beyond their control, stepping them from finishing the work. God. Days went on following Walton's disappearance and several unsuccessful searches of the Turkey Springs area where the crew had been working. Suspicion began to increasingly return to the crew members. Due to the amount of time he had been missing, combined with the below freezing temperatures of the first 2 nights of his disappearance, the feeling amongst the police began to discreetly change from a search and rescue mission to one of recovering the young man's body. He's dead, Jim, and not as you know it. After the second full day of searching, police would approach crew members with an offer for them to take a lie detector test. They had initially offered to take any kind of test in the hours following disappearance in order to prove their accounts were truthful. Polygraph examiner Cy Gilson generally respected the field as being fair and accurate with such reasons would conduct tests. All the crew members would pass the tests with no problems whatsoever, aside from Alan Dulles, who didn't fail the test, but whose results were inconclusive. It was also known that Dulles didn't particularly get on with Walton. His inconclusive result, despite the efforts of the crew members singling him out as being responsible for what the police were increasingly sure was Walton's death. Incidentally, after 20 years later, in 1993, Gilson would retest Mike Rogers and Alan Dulles, as well as Travis Walton. He would use a state-of-the-art computer. All 3 of the men passed the test. Back in the winter of 1975, among suspicions of foul play, Walton's sister Grant Neff received a sudden phone call slightly after the midnight on the evening of the 10th of November, going into the 11th of November. On the other end of the phone was Travis. Ooh. Travis, phone home. Yeah, yeah, something like that. Walton sounded confused, panicked, and disorientated. His sister managed to retrieve information that he was calling from Exxon Station somewhere nearby. Grant's husband and Walter's brother Dwayne would immediately jump into their vehicle and head towards Heber, where they indeed found Walton crumpled to the floor of the phone booth at the gas station. Years later, in the aforementioned book, The Walton Experience, Walton would recall his first memories of waking up following his 5-day disappearance. He would claim that he regained consciousness lying on my stomach with his head on his outstretched arm. He immediately noticed how cold the air was and how we was instantly awake. It was then he noticed a bright light, Jim. It was then he noticed a bright light on the bottom of a curved gleaming hole. Then he noticed the mirrored outline of a silvery disc hovering somewhere over him. He would estimate the craft to have been around 40 feet in length. It moved silently above him for several moments as he followed, moving only his eyes from where he lay. He could see the night sky. Surrounding trees in the highway centre were reflected in the curving mirror of the hull. Suddenly, a warmth caressed the exposed skin of his body, and the object shot vertically into the sky. In an instant, the craft was gone. Walter would later recall that the most striking thing about its departure was its quietness. After taking Walton to his mother's house, his brother Dwayne would take him to hospital in Phoenix. After some initial resistance, all involved would allow PRO's Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation to drive the case. They would immediately have Walton examined by 2 different physicians. Now, according to Walter, the last thing he clearly remembered was being struck by a beam of light as he stood underneath the glowing disc. The next thing he knew, he was lying on a flat surface like a reclined bed. He immediately noticed that the air was damp and heavy. He also immediately felt pain over his body. A light shone. A light shone. Oh, it was shone. It was shone. A light shone down on him from above. Death was decidedly difficult and painful. He at first believed he was in hospital somewhere. Then he noticed the 3 figures stood around him. Each donned an orange suit. Although it was perfectly obvious to Walton that they were not all human, he would later state these figures were about 5 feet high, certainly no taller than that, and with strange bald and enormous heads. The eyes were equally large. He would describe them as almost brown without much white in them. The rest of their facial features were decidedly smaller than the size suggested. What Walton was ultimately describing was 3 grey aliens. With a surge of fear-induced adrenaline running through him, Walter jumped down from the bed and quickly stood. He began to shout at the 3 strange creatures, warning them to stay away. He managed to pick up a glass-like cylinder from a shelf. He backed away. His intention was to smash the object and use it as a weapon. However, he was unable to break it. Instead, he waved it at the 3 creatures, and they continued to shout. To his amazement, they backed away and left the room. After waiting for a moment, Walton also left the room. He would proceed down the hallway and soon found himself in a round room. He could see a strange chair with an overly large back to it, sitting in the middle of the room. Walton stepped forward. Making his way towards the chair, as he moved inside the room, lights began to come on around him. He cast his eyes around the intriguing and mysterious room, assuring himself that he was still the only one inside. Satisfied, he moved forward, sitting in the chair. Upon doing so, lights came on all around the room, reminding Walton of a planetarium ceiling. He would recall that the left-hand arm of the chair had a single short, thick lever with an oddly moulded handle. On the other arm was a glowing green screen, casting out a warm glow. Walton pushed on the lever and the lights rotated until he let go of it. Now, stopping in the new position, Suddenly realising he had no real idea what such buttons and levers might do, he got out of the chair, and as he did so, the lights above him went out. Then he heard a noise from behind him. He spun around, witnessing a tall humanoid figure with a glassy helmet. On his frame was blue overalls. Walter began to fire questions at the man, but he either didn't hear or ignored him. Instead, he would motion to him that he should follow him. Walton did so. Following the tall figure down another hallway, he carried on down a steel ramp and soon found himself in another large room, a room similar to an aircraft hangar. It was then that he realised the ramp was a walkway out of the disc-shaped craft. He saw two other discs landed in the hangar in front of him. Now, whether Walter was on board a mothership of some sort, somewhere in Earth's orbit, or even farther out in space, or whether he was taken to a more terrestrial place somewhere on Earth, is unclear. He was, however, led into another room where he claimed to see three humans, two men and a woman. Unlike the person who led him here, these people had no helmets, although they too, as Walton could now see on the helmeted man, had a strange, larger appearance to their eyes. Once more, he began to ask questions of the trio. However, much in the same way as the first humanoid, they dismissed his inquiries. They instead directed him to another table or object. Motioning that he should sit down before he realised what was happening, the woman approached him and abused him. In her hands, she had a mask-like device. In another second, it was clasped to his face. A second later, he lost consciousness. Walter claimed his next memory is of waking up on his stomach outside the gas station in the freezing cold. Above him was one of the disc-shaped objects which shot directly upward at breakneck speed. After several seconds, it was then, still confused, that Walter went to the telephone box nearby. In his mind, he believed he had been missing for a few hours. It was only when his brother arrived that he was told he'd been missing for a full 5 days. There were certainly some interesting details that surfaced in the immediate aftermath of Walter's return. Many theories circulated that Walton may have been attacked or drugged. He had, according to the theory, awoken in an unknown hospital, and confused would believe his strange surroundings to be that of the inside of a spaceship. While that wouldn't make some sense, it wouldn't explain the sightings of the disc-shaped craft by all the crew, including Walton. Indeed, it was this sighting that would have, if we believe the above theory, influenced Walton's confused perception. And besides, if Walton was attacked in such a manner, by whom and by why? Furthermore, there is no sign of a head injury, nor was there any drugs that may have been caused such confusion presenting the system. Another little known event in the immediate days following Walton's return was the meeting with him and his brother. Wayne had an ARPO consultant named Harder in an event to prove his genuineness and to unlock any other mysteries of the account. Walton would agree to undergo hypnotic regression. Harder himself would conduct the session. What was interesting, though, was that Walton's conscious recall and unconscious memory were the same. Furthermore, and perhaps even more interesting on either mental level, Walton could access only the 2-hour period following the beam of light hitting him in the chest. Anything beyond that had a feeling of being off limits. Both Walton and Harder would get the impression that it was indeed memories to unlock, but that there was a personal mental block preventing access to them. Walton would even state that if he attempted to retrieve these memories continued, he would die. But other details that very much supported Walton's claims. He supported a full 5 days' worth of beard growth, for example. He also appeared significantly malnourished, which is interesting. However, is that despite this very real physical evidence of a prolonged period of starvation, there is also evidence to suggest that some form of basic nutrition would find its way to Walton. There wasn't, for example, elevated levels of electrodes in the blood, which would normally be the case had Walton literally starved of all nutritions for a prolonged period. So with that in mind, whoever or whatever did take Walton for the woodlands of Arizona, or wherever they took him, they were concerned, prepared, and aware enough to measure measure, administer appropriate levels of fluids and nutrients to prevent any long-term damage to his health. Perhaps also of interest were several sightings on the 10th of November, several hours before the return of Walton. Though the location is unclear, the witnesses report seeing a large V formation of orange light over her house. She waited to see if the lights would return, then she blanked out. Her next memory is of sitting in a large chair in a strange room with dim light all around. She could see several human figures walking backwards and forth through a doorway. The next thing she knows, she was back in her home. At the same night, a report came from Minor Air Force Base in North Dakota. According to the report, a bright starlight object about the size of a car was moving across the sky. Expectations would suggest an altitude of 1,000 to 2,000 feet high, but with no noise whatsoever. The sighting would receive collaboration from 3 other witnesses. Interestingly, several sightings came from Canada in the early hours of the 11th of November. So there's where I'm going to be leaving it, because there's so much. If I was to go through everything, that all the information I have there, this video would go on for about an hour and a half, and I can't do that. Half hour is my standard length for a video. So we have that abduction case of Travis Walton. Now, I believe it did. I do believe this abduction case happened. I don't think he's lying in the slightest wee bit. I mean, why would he lie? There's no reason to lie about that. Well, I suppose there is, I suppose. But, as I said, I've got to cut this short there. It's got to be cut short. It's got to be cut short. Tell me what you think about it. Tell me if you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. So, next week, what are we talking about next week? That's the question here. What are we talking about next week? Well, we are going to be doing a Did You Know? Well, not Did You Know, but, Did You Know? And all these facts are going to be about the United Nations. So there you go. Upon that note, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already and you'd like to see some more, please subscribe to my channel and ring that bell when you want to know when the videos are coming out. So next time, tip it off, my friends. This is Tread the Rev. I ain't no vicar. Signing off until next week. Bye-bye.